The Norse story, The Children of Odin, is brought to you by notaprofit.org, the place on the internet to find spiritual guidance powered by artificial intelligence. The Children of Odin, Part 8, Section Roman 3, Chapter 5. The children of Loki, the children of Loki, and the witch Angerboda were not as the children of men. They were formless as water, or air, or fire is formless, but it was given to each of them to take on the form that was most like to their own greed. Now the dwellers in Asgard knew that these powers of evil had been born into the world, and they thought it well that they should take on forms and appear before them in Asgard. So they sent one to Jarnvid, the iron wood, bidding Loki bring before the gods the powers born of him and the witch Angerboda. So Loki came into Asgard once more, and his offspring took on forms and showed themselves to the gods. The first, whose greed was destruction, showed himself as a fearful wolf. Fenrir he was named, and the second, whose greed was slow destruction, showed itself as a serpent. Jörmungand it was called. The third, whose greed was for withering of all life, took on a form also. When the gods saw it, they were affrighted. For this had the form of a woman, and one side of her was that of a living woman, and the other side of her was that of a corpse. Fear ran through Asgard as this form was revealed, and as the name that went with it, Hela, was uttered. Far out of sight of the gods Hela was thrust. Odin took her and hurled her down to the deeps that are below the world. He cast her down to Niflheim, where she took to herself power over the 9 regions. There, in the place that is lowest of all, Hela reigns. Her hall is Elvidnir. It is set round with high walls, and it has barred gates. Precipice is the threshold of that hall. Hunger is the table within it. Care is the bed, and burning anguish is the hanging of the chamber. Thor laid hold upon Jörmungand. He flung the serpent into the ocean that engirdles the world. But in the depths of the ocean Jörmungand flourished. It grew and grew until it encircled the whole world. And men knew it as the Midgard Serpent. Fenrir the wolf might not be seized upon by any of the Aesir. Fearfully he ranged through Asgard, and they were only able to bring him to the outer courts by promising to give him all the food he was able to eat. The Aesir shrank from feeding Fenrir, but Tyr, the brave swordsman, was willing to bring food to the wolf's lair. Every day he brought him huge provision and fed him with the point of his sword. The wolf grew and grew until he became monstrous and a terror in the minds of the dwellers in Asgard. At last the gods in council considered it and decided that Fenrir must be bound. The chain that they would bind him with was called leading. In their own smithy the gods made it, and its weight was greater than Thor's hammer. Not by force could the gods get the fetter upon Fenrir, so they sent Skirnir, the servant of Frey, to beguile the wolf into letting it go upon him. Skirnir came to his lair and stood near him, and he was dwarfed by the wolf's monstrous size. "How great may thy strength be, mighty one?" Skirnir asked. "Couldst thou break this chain easily, the gods would try thee." In scorn Fenrir looked down on the fetter Skirnir dragged. In scorn he stood still, allowing leading to be placed upon him. Then, with an effort that was the least part of his strength, he stretched himself and broke the chain in 2. The gods were dismayed, but they took more iron, and with greater fires and mightier hammer blows they forged another fetter. Dromi, this one was called, and it was half again as strong as leading was. Skirnir the venturesome brought it to the wolf's lair, and in scorn Fenrir let the mightier chain be placed upon him. He shook himself and the chain held. Then his eyes became fiery, and he stretched himself with a growl and a snarl. Dromi broke across, and Fenrir stood looking balefully at Skirnir. The gods saw that no chain they could forge would bind Fenrir, and they fell more and more into fear of him. They took counsel again, and they bethought them of the wonder. Work the dwarfs had made for them, the spear Gungnir, the ship Skidbladnir, the hammer Mjolnir. Could the dwarfs be got to make the fetter to bind Fenrir? If they would do it, the gods would add to their domain. Skirnir went down to Svartheim with the Sage from Asgard. The dwarf chief swelled with pride to think that it was left to them to make the fetter that would bind Fenrir. "We dwarfs can make a fetter that will bind the wolf," he said. "Out of 6 things we will make it." "What are these 6 things?" Skirnir asked. "The roots of stones, the breath of a fish, the beards of women, the noise made by the footfalls of cats, the sinews of bears, the spittle of a bird." "I have never heard the noise made by a cat's footfall, nor have I seen the roots of stones nor the beards of women. But use what things you will, O helper of the gods." The chief brought his 6 things together, and the dwarfs in their smithy worked for days and nights. They forged a fetter that was named Gleipnir. Smooth and soft as a silken string it was. Skirnir brought it to Asgard and put it into the hands of the gods. Then a day came when the gods said that once again they should try to put a fetter upon Fenrir. But if he was to be bound, they would bind him far from Asgard. Lyngvi was an island that they often went to make sport, and they spoke of going there. Fenrir growled that he would go with them. He came and he sported in his own terrible way. And then, as if it were to make more sport, one of the Aesir shook out the smooth cord and showed it to Fenrir. "It is stronger than you might think, mighty one," they said. "Will you not let it go upon you that we may see you break it?" Fenrir out of his fiery eyes looked scorn upon them. "What fame would there be for me," he said, "in breaking such a binding?" They showed him that none in their company could break it slender as it was. "Thou only art able to break it, mighty one," they said. "The cord is slender, but there may be an enchantment in it." Fenrir said, "Thou canst not break it, Fenrir, and we need not dread thee any more." The gods said, "Then was the wolf ravenous wroth, for he lived on the fear that he made in the minds of the gods. I am loth to have this binding upon me," he said, "but if one of the Aesir will put his hand in my mouth as a pledge that I shall be freed of it, I will let you put it on me." The gods looked wistfully on one another. It would be health to them all to have Fenrir bound, but who would lose his band to have it done? One and then another of the Sur stepped backward, but not Tyr, the brave swordsman. He stepped to Fenrir and laid his left hand before those tremendous jaws. "Not thy left hand, thy sword hand, O Tyr," growled Fenrir, and Tyr put his sword hand into that terrible mouth. Then the cord Gleipnir was put upon Fenrir. With fiery eyes he watched the gods bind him. When the binding was on him, he stretched himself as before. He stretched himself to a monstrous size, but the binding did not break off him. Then with fury he snapped his jaws upon the hand, and Tyr's hand, the swordsman's hand, was torn off, but Fenrir was bound. They fixed a mighty chain to the fetter, and they passed the chain through a hole they bored through a great rock. The monstrous wolf made terrible efforts to break loose, but the rock and the chain and the fetter held. Then seeing him secured, and to avenge the loss of Tyr's hand, the gods took Tyr's sword and drove it to the hilt through his underjaw. Horribly the wolf howled. Mightily the foam flowed down from his jaws. That foam flowing made a river that is called Vana, river of fury, that flowed on until Ragnarok came, the twilight of the gods. Section Roman 3, Chapter 6. Baldur's doom in Asgard. There were 2 places that meant strength and joy to the Aesir and the Vanir. One was the garden where grew the apples that Aegina gathered, and the other was the peace stead, where, in a palace called Breidablik, Baldur, beloved dwelt. In the peace stead no crime had ever been committed, no blood had ever been shed, no falseness had ever been spoken. Contentment came into the minds of all in Asgard when they thought upon this place. Ah, were it not that the peace stead was there, happy with Baldur's presence, the minds of the Aesir and the Vanir might have become gloomy and stern from thinking on the direful things that were arrayed against them. Baldur was beautiful. So beautiful was he that all the white blossoms on the earth were called by his name. Baldur was happy. So happy was he that all the birds on the earth sang his name. So just and so wise was Baldur that the judgment he pronounced might never be altered. Nothing foul or unclean had ever come near where he had his dwelling. 'Tis Breidablik called, where Baldur the fair hath built him a bower, in the land where I know least loathliness lies. Healing things were done in Baldur's stead. Tyr's wrist was healed of the wounds that Fenrir's fangs had made, and their Frey's mind became less troubled with the foreboding that Loki had filled it with when he railed at him about the bartering of his sword. Now after Fenrir had been Bound to the rock in the faraway island, the Aesir and the Vanir knew a while of contentment. They passed bright days in Baldur's stead, listening to the birds that made music there, and it was there that Brag, the poet, wove into his never-ending story the tale of Thor's adventures amongst the giants. But even into Baldur's stead foreboding came. One day little Nasa, the child of Freya and lost Odur, was brought there in such sorrow that no one outside could comfort her. Nanna, Baldur's gentle wife, took the child upon her lap and found ways of soothing her. Then Nasa told of a dream that had filled her with fright. She had dreamt of Hela, the queen that is half living woman and half corpse. In her dream Hela had come into Asgard saying, "A lord of the Aesir I must have to dwell with me in my realm beneath the earth." Nasa had such fear from this dream that she had fallen into a deep sorrow. A silence fell upon all when the dream of Nasa was told. Nanna looked wistfully at Odin All-Father, and Odin, looking at Frigga, saw that a fear had entered her breast. He left the peace stead and went to his watchtower Lidskjalf. He waited there till Hugin and Munin should come to him. Every day his 2 ravens flew through the world, and coming back to him, told him of all that was happening. And now they might tell him of happenings that would let him guess if Hela had indeed turned her thoughts toward Asgard, or if she had the power to draw one down to her dismal abode. The ravens flew to him, and lighting one on each of his shoulders, told him of things that were being said up and down Yggdrasil, the world tree. Ratatursk the squirrel was saying them, and Ratatursk had heard them from the brood of serpents that with Nidhurg, the great dragon, gnawed ever at the root of Yggdrasil. He told it to the eagle that sat ever on the topmost bough, that in Hela's habitation a bed was spread, and a chair was left empty for some lordly comer. And hearing this, Odin thought that it were better that Fenrir the wolf should range ravenously through Asgard, than that Hela should win one from amongst them to fill that chair and lie in that bed. He mounted Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, and rode down toward the abodes of the dead. For 3 days and 3 nights of silence and darkness he journeyed on. Once one of the hounds of Helheim broke loose and bayed upon Sleipnir's tracks. For a day and a night Garm, the hound, pursued them, and Odin smelled the blood that dripped from his monstrous jaws. At last he came to where, wrapped in their shrouds, a field of the dead lay. He dismounted from Sleipnir and called upon one to rise and speak with him. It was Volva, a dead prophetess, he called, and when he pronounced her name he uttered a rune that had the power to break the sleep of the dead. There was a groaning in the middle of where the shrouded ones lay. Then Odin cried out, "Arise, Volva, prophetess." There was a stir in the middle of where the shrouded ones lay, and a head and shoulders were thrust up from amongst the dead. Who calls on Volva, the prophetess? The rains have drenched my flesh, and the storms have shaken my bones for more seasons than the living know. No living voice has a right to call me from my sleep with the dead. It is Vegtam, the wanderer, who calls. For whom is the bed prepared, and the seat left empty in Hela's habitation? For Bald, your Odin's son, is the bed prepared, and the seat left empty. Now let me go back to my sleep with the dead. But now Odin saw beyond Volva's prophecy. Who is it? He cried out, that stands with unbowed head, and that will not lament for Bald, your answer, Volva, prophetess. Thou seest far, but thou canst not see clearly. Thou art Odin. I call see clearly, but I cannot see far. Now let me go back to my steep with the dead. Volva, prophetess. Odin cried out again, but the voice from amongst the shrouded ones said, Thou canst not wake me any more until the fires of Muspelheim blaze above my head. Then there was silence in the field of the dead, and Odin turned Sleipnir, his steed, and for 4 days, through the gloom and silence, he journeyed back to Asgard. Frigga had felt the fear that Odin had felt. She looked toward Baldur, and the shade of Hela came between her and her son. But then she heard the birds sing in the peace stead, and she knew that none of all the things in the world would injure Baldur. And to make it sure, she went to all the things that could hurt him, and from each of them she took an oath that it would not injure Baldur, the well-beloved. She took an oath from fire and from water, from iron and from all metals, from earths and stones and great trees, from birds and beasts and creeping things, from poisons and diseases. Very readily they all gave the oath that they would work no injury on Baldur. Then when Frigga went back and told what she had accomplished, the gloom that had lain on Asgard lifted. Baldur would be spared to them. Hela might have a place prepared in her dark habitation, but neither fire nor water, nor iron nor any metals, nor earths nor stones nor great woods, nor birds nor beasts nor creeping things, nor poisons nor diseases, would help her to bring him down. Hela had no arms to draw you to her. The Aesir and the Vanir cried to Baldur. Hope was renewed for them, and they made games to honor Baldur. They had him stand in the peace stead, and they brought against him all the things that had sworn to leave him hurtless, and neither the battle-axe flung full at him, nor the stone out of the sling, nor the burning brand, nor the deluge of water would injure the beloved of Asgard. The Aesir and the Vanir laughed joyously to see these things fall harmlessly from him, while a throng came to join them in the games, dwarfs and friendly giants. But Loki the hater came in with that throng. He watched the games from afar. He saw the missiles and the weapons being flung, and he saw Baldur stand smiling and happy under the strokes of metal and stones and great woods. He wondered at the sight, but he knew that he might not ask the meaning of it from the ones who knew him. He changed his shape into that of an old woman, and he went amongst those who were making sport for Baldur. He spoke to dwarfs and friendly giants. Go to Frigga and ask. Go to Frigga and ask, was all the answer Loki got from any of them. Then to Fenrir, Frigga's mansion, Loki went. He told those in the mansion that he was Groa, the old enchantress who was drawing out of Thor's head the fragments of a grindstone that a giant's throw had embedded in it. Frigga knew about Groa, and she praised the enchantress for what she had done. Many fragments of the great grindstone have I taken out of Thor's head by the charms I know, said the pretended Groa. Thor was so grateful that he brought back to me the husband that he once had carried off to the end of earth. So overjoyed was I to find my husband restored, that I forgot the rest of the charms. And I left some fragments of the stone in Thor's head. So Loki said, repeating a story that was true. Now I remember the rest of the charm. He said, and I can draw out the fragments of the stone that are left. But will you not tell me, O Queen, what is the meaning of the extraordinary things I saw the Aesir and the Vanir doing? I will tell you, said Frigga, looking kindly and happily at the pretended old woman. They are hurling all manner of heavy and dangerous things at Baldur, my beloved son. And all Asgard cheers to see that neither metal, nor stone, nor great wood will hurt him. But why will they not hurt him? Said the pretended enchantress. Because I have drawn an oath from all dangerous and threatening things to leave Bald. You're hurtless, said Frigga. From all things, lady. Is there no thing in all the world that has not taken an oath to leave Bald? You're hurtless. Well, indeed, there is one thing that has not taken the oath. But that thing is so small and weak that I passed it by without taking thought of it. What can it be, lady? The mistletoe that is without root or strength. It grows on the eastern side of Valhalla. I passed it by without drawing an oath from it. Surely you were not wrong to pass it by. What could the mistletoe, the rootless mistletoe, do against Baldur? Saying this, the pretended enchantress hobbled off. But not far did the pretender go hobbling. He changed his gait and hurried to the eastern side of Valhalla. There a great oak tree flourished, and out of a branch of it a little bush of mistletoe grew. Loki broke off a spray, and with it in his hand he went to where the Aesir and the Vanir were still playing games to honor Baldur. All were laughing as Loki drew near, for the giants and the dwarfs, the Asinir and the Vana, were all casting missiles. The giants threw too far, and the dwarfs could not throw far enough, while the Asinir and the Vana threw far and wide of the mark. In the midst of all that glee and gamesomeness it was strange to see one standing joyless. But one stood so, and he was of the Aesir herd. Baldur's blind brother, why do you not enter the game? Said Loki to him in his changed voice, I have no missile to throw at Baldur. Herdjur said, take this and throw it. Said Loki, it is a twig of the mistletoe. I cannot see to throw it. Said Herdjur, I will guide your hand. Said Loki. He put the twig of mistletoe in Herdjur's hand, and he guided the hand for the throw. The twig flew toward Baldur. It struck him on the breast, and it pierced him. Then Baldur fell down with a deep groan. The Aesir and the Vanir, the dwarfs and the friendly giants, stood still in doubt and fear and amazement. Loki slipped away, and blind Herdjur, from whose hand the twig of mistletoe had gone, stood quiet, not knowing that his throw had bereft Baldur of life. Then a wailing rose around the peace stead. It was from the Aesir and the Vana. Baldur was dead, and they began to lament him. And while they were lamenting him, the beloved of Asgard, Odin, came amongst them. Hela has won our Baldur from us. Odin said to Frigga as they both bent over the body of their beloved son, "Nay, I will not say it." Frigga said, "When the Aesir and the Vanir had won their senses back, the mother of Baldur went amongst them. Who amongst you would win my love and good will?" she said. "Whoever would let him ride down to Hela's dark realm, and ask the queen to take ransom for Baldur. It may be she will take it, and let Baldur come back to us. Who amongst you will go? Odin's steed is ready for the journey." Then forth stepped Hermod the Nimble, the brother of Baldur. He mounted Sleipnir and turned the 8-legged steed down toward Hela's dark realm. For 9 days and 9 nights Hermod rode on. His way was through rugged glens, one deeper and darker than the other. He came to the river that is called Jurl, and to the bridge across it, that is all glittering with gold. The pale maid who guards the bridge spoke to him. "The hue of life is still on thee," said Modgudur, the pale maid. "Why dost thou journey down to Hela's deathly realm?" "I am Hermod," he said, "and I go to see if Hela will take ransom for Baldur." "Fearful is Hela's habitation for one to come to," said Modgudur, the pale maid. "All round it is a steep wall that even thy steed might hardly leap. Its threshold is precipice. The bed therein is care, the table is hunger, the hanging of the chamber is burning anguish. It may be that Hela will take ransom for Baldur. If all things in the world still lament for Baldur, Hela will have to take ransom and let him go from her," said Modgudur, the pale maid that guards the glittering bridge. "It is well, then, for all things lament Baldur. I will go to her and make her take ransom. Thou mayst not pass until it is of a surety that all things still lament him. Go back to the world and make sure. If thou dost come to this glittering bridge and tell me that all things still lament Baldur, I will let thee pass, and Hela will have to hearken to thee. I will come back to thee, and thou, Modgudur, pale maid, wilt have to let me pass. Then I will let thee pass," said Modgudur. Joyously Hermod turned Sleipnir and rode back through the rugged glens, each one less gloomy than the other. He reached the upper world and saw that all things were still lamenting for Baldur. Joyously Hermod rode onward. He met the Vanir in the middle of the world, and he told them the happy tidings. Then Hermod and the Vanir went through the world, seeking out each thing, and finding that each thing still wept for Baldur. But one day Hermod came upon a crow that was sitting on the dead branch of a tree. The crow made no lament as he came near. She rose up and flew away, and Hermod followed her to make sure that she lamented for Baldur. He lost sight of her near a cave, and then before the cave he saw a hag with blackened teeth who raised no voice of lament. "If thou art the crow that came flying here, make lament for Baldur." Hermod said, "I, Thocht, will make no lament for Baldur." The hag said, "Let Hela keep what she holds. All things weep tears for Baldur." Hermod said, "I will weep dry tears for him," said the hag. She hobbled into her cave, and as Hermod followed, a crow fluttered out. He knew that this was Thocht, the evil hag, transformed. He followed her, and she went through the world croaking, "Let Hela keep what she holds. Let Hela keep what she holds." Then Hermod knew that he might not ride to Hela's habitation. All things knew that there was one thing in the world that would not lament for Baldur. The Vanir came back to him, and with head bowed over Sleipnir's inane, Hermod rode into Asgard. Now the Aesir and the Vanir, knowing that no ransom would be taken for Baldur, and that the joy and content of Asgard were gone indeed, made ready his body for the burning. First they covered Baldur's body with a rich robe, and each left beside it his most precious possession. Then they all took leave of him, kissing him upon the brow, but Nanna, his gentle wife, flung herself on his dead breast, and her heart broke, and she died of her grief. Then did the Aesir and the Vanir weep afresh, and they took the body of Nanna and they placed it side by side with Baldur's. On his own great ship, Ringhorn, would Baldur be placed with Nanna beside him. Then the ship would be launched on the water, and all would be burned with fire. But it was found that none of the Aesir or the Vanir were able to launch Bald, Yor's great ship. Hyrroken, a giantess, was sent for. She came mounted on a great wolf with twisted serpents for a bridle. 4 giants held fast the wolf when she alighted. She came to the ship, and with a single push she sent it into the sea. The rollers struck out fire as the ship dashed across them. Then when it rode, the water fires mounted on the ship, and in the blaze of the fires one was seen bending over the body of Baldur and whispering into his ear. It was Odin All-Father. Then he went down off the ship, and all the fires rose into a mighty burning. Speechlessly the Aesir and the Vanir watched with tears streaming down their faces, while all things lamented, crying, Bald, your beautiful is dead, is dead. And what was it that Odin All-Father whispered to Bald, as he bent above him with the flames of the burning ship around? He whispered of a heaven above Asgard that Surtur's flames might not reach, and of a life that would come to beauty again after the world of men and the world of the gods had been searched through and through with fire. Section Roman 3, Chapter 7. Loki's punishment. The crow went flying toward the north, croaking as she flew, Let Hela keep what she holds. Let Hela keep what she holds. That crow was the hag Thocht transformed, and the hag Thocht was Loki. He flew to the north and came into the wastes of Jotunheim. As a crow he lived there, hiding himself from the wrath of the gods. He told the giants that the time had come for them to build the ship Naglfar, the ship that was to be built out of the nails of dead men, and that was to sail to Asgard on the day of Ragnarök with the giant Reimer steering it. And hearkening to what he said, the giants then and there began to build Naglfar, the ship that gods and men wished to remain unbuilt for long. Then Loki, tiring of the wastes of Jotunheim, flew to the burning south. As a lizard he lived amongst the rocks of Muspelheim, and he made the fire giants rejoice when he told them of the loss of Frey's sword and of Tyr's right hand. But still in Asgard there was one who wept for Loki, Siguna, his wife. Although he had left her and had shown his hatred for her, Siguna wept for her evil husband. He left Muspelheim as he had left Jotunheim, and he came to live in the world of men. He knew that he had now come into a place where the wrath of the gods might find him, and so he made plans to be ever ready for escape. He had come to the river where, ages before, he had slain the otter that was the son of the enchanter, and on the very rock where the otter had eaten the salmon on the day of his killing, Loki built his house. He made 4 doors to it so that he might see in every direction, and the power that he kept for himself was the power of transforming himself into a salmon. Often as a salmon he swam in the river, but even for the fishes that swam beside him Loki had hatred. Out of flax and yarn he wove a net that men might have the means of taking them out of the water. The wrath that the gods had against Loki did not pass away. It was he who, as Thocht, the hag, had given Hela the power to keep Bald, unransomed. It was he who had put into Herd, Yor's hand, the sprig of mistletoe that had bereft Bald, of life. Empty was Asgard now that Bald, lived no more in the peace stead, and stern and gloomy grew the minds of the Aesir and the Vanir with thinking on the direful things that were arrayed against them. Odin in his hall of Valhalla thought only of the ways by which he could bring heroes to him to be his help in defending Asgard. The gods searched through the world, and they found at last the place where Loki had made his dwelling. He was weaving the net to take fishes when he saw them coming from 4 directions. He threw the net into the fire so that it was burnt, and he sprang into the river and transformed himself into a salmon. When the gods entered his dwelling, they found only the burnt-out fire, but there was one amongst them who could understand all that he saw. In the ashes were the marks of the burnt net, and he knew that these were the tracing of something to catch fishes. And from the marks left in the ashes he made a net that was the same as the one Loki had burnt. With it in their hands the gods went down the river, dragging the net through the water. Loki was affrighted to find the thing of his own weaving brought against him. He lay between 2 stones at the bottom of the river, and the net passed over him. But the gods knew that the net had touched something at the bottom. They fastened weights to it, and they dragged the net through the river again. Loki knew that he might not escape it this time, and he rose in the water and swam toward the sea. The gods caught sight of him as he leaped over a waterfall. They followed him, dragging the net. Thor waited behind, ready to seize him should he turn back. Loki came out at the mouth of the river, and behold, there was a great eagle hovering over the waves of the sea and ready to swoop down on fishes. He turned back in the river. He made a leap that took him over the net that the gods were dragging. But Thor was behind the net, and he caught the salmon in his powerful hands, and he held him for all the struggle that Loki made. No fish had ever struggled so before. Loki got himself free all but his tail, but Thor held to the tail and brought him amongst the rocks and forced him to take on his proper form. He was in the hands of those whose wrath was strong against him. They brought him to a cavern, and they bound him to 3 sharp, pointed rocks. With cords that were made of the sinews of wolves they bound him, and they transformed the cords into iron bands. There they would have left Loki bound and helpless. But Skadi, with her fierce giant blood, was not content that he should be left untormented. She found a serpent that had deadly venom, and she hung this serpent above Loki's head. The drops of venom fell upon him, bringing him anguish drop by drop, minute by minute. So Loki's torture went on. But Siguna with the pitying heart came to his relief. She exiled herself from Asgard, and endured the darkness and the cold of the cavern, that she might take some of the torment away from him who was her husband. Over Loki Siguna stood, holding in her hands a cup into which fell the serpent's venom, thus sparing him from the full measure of anguish. Now and then Siguna had to turn aside to spill out the flowing cup. And then the drops of venom fell upon Loki, and he screamed in agony, twisting in his bonds. It was then that men felt the earth quake. There in his bonds Loki stayed until the coming of Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods.